So this will be part 6 of the Mayans were Egyptians, and this will be the final video in this series. And I want to pick up where I left off in part 5. So in the end of part 5, I showed you guys a rare image of Tutankhamun. And this is the only image that I've ever seen of Tutankhamun without a crown on his head. And this image is important because it shows us that Tutankhamun was a Moor. So according to white people and their version of history, they will have you believe that Europe was inhabited by white people in ancient times, and that the Moors didn't show up until 711 AD, which is 1300 years ago. But all of the evidence that I've presented in this series proves that the Moors did not just appear in Europe 1300 years ago, because Tutankhamun, who was a Moor, lived 3300 years ago. And Tutankhamun had greyhound dogs 3,300 years ago. These dogs originate in England. Not only that, his sister went to Scotland 3,300 years ago after their father Akhenaten was killed. And 200 years before Tutankhamun and his sister were even born, Hatshepsut, who was from the same bloodline, went to Europe 3,500 years ago. So all of the evidence shows us that the Moors were in Europe at least 3,500 years ago, and that they didn't just show up in 700 AD, as white people say. So Tutankhamun and his bloodline are not only connected to Europe thousands of years ago, but also to the Americas. So I've shown you guys this alabaster egg that was found in North America. It belonged to Tutankhamun, so we know that this alabaster egg is an artifact from the time of Tutankhamun, which has to be at least 3,300 years old. And the alabaster egg bears the face of the high priest of Tutankhamun, who was a Mayan. And there are hieroglyphs in Egypt from 3,000 years ago showing us that the Egyptians had corn, but corn is native to Mexico. So all of the evidence shows us that black people were inhabiting Europe and the Americas for thousands of years. So it's important to study all of the castles and various types of structures that were built by the Moors and the symbols that they used in these buildings. So there are thousands of castles and structures that can be found in Europe that were built by the Moors. This particular structure found in France is over 6,800 years old. And there are too many castles in Europe to list all of them. There are 25,000 castles in Germany alone. But the truth is that the same castles that the Moors built all over Europe can also be found all over North and South America as well, proving that the Moors didn't just suddenly appear in Europe 1,300 years ago, but they were already in Europe thousands of years before that. And they were also in the Americas thousands of years ago, building the same castles that they were building in Europe. So it was documented by the Spaniards in the year 1519. That Cortez and 400 of his men marched into the Aztec capital located in Mexico and invaded the Aztec capital city. But upon close examination of the so-called Aztec city as documented by Cortez, you'll notice the 3 castle structures in the middle of the city. And you can see that this is the same 3 castle or 3-doored structures that were built by the Moors of Europe and the Egyptians in Africa. In fact, these 3-doored structures can be found all over the world. So when it comes to the people known as the Aztecs that were invaded by Cortez in 1519, we can tell by the structure of their city that they were Moors. And I've shown you guys the photos from the Library of Congress that shows us the so-called last Aztec couple. And to the right, taken from one of the Aztec codices, shows an Aztec woman. And we can look at the city of Mexico and we can find countless old buildings that were clearly built by the Moors. This would indicate that the people known as the Aztecs were in fact actually Moors. So moving forward, if we look at the flower symbol that can be found on the Notre Dame Cathedral in Europe, the same flower symbol can be found on Celtic artifacts in Europe as well as Egyptian statues. To the top right is a statue of an Egyptian woman, and she has the same symbol carved into her breasts. And the very same symbol can be found on 2 very old churches in Baltimore. and the symbol is located in the very same position as the one in the Notre Dame Cathedral in Europe. And there are countless buildings in Baltimore that were built by the Moors, and Baltimore had one of the largest population of Moors in America, hence the name Baltimore. So this flower symbol found in Baltimore and Europe was first used in the Middle East 6,000 years ago. So if we look closely at the clothing worn by this Sumerian man, we see that his clothing is embroidered with the same flower symbol that can be found in Europe and North America. So we can look at another symbol that has a similar history to the flower symbol. This symbol is a sun cross, one of many sun crosses used by the native Black people of the Americas. This one in particular is important because it was used by the Mayans and the Aztecs of South America, and this very same sun cross symbol was used by the Egyptians 6,000 years ago. The Sumerians were also using the sun cross symbol 6,000 years ago in the Middle East, as well as the Crow tribe of North America, who also used the same sun cross symbol. So we have to ask ourselves, who were these native people of North and South America who were using ancient symbols that were also being used in Africa 6,000 years ago? Here we have an ancient symbol used by the Moors of Germany. The same symbol can be found on rock glyphs in North America dating to 1,300 years ago. So the last symbol that I want to show you guys is what's called today the Star of David. So most people associate the Star of David with the Jewish people. But the truth is the Jewish people adopted this symbol in 1897 when they created the Zionist movement. But the symbol itself is ancient. And the reason that the Jews call it the Star of David is because the biblical King David is Tutmos III, as I've explained in the Real Faces of the Bible. So the so-called Star of David, or Tutmos III, is not a Jewish symbol at all. It's actually Egyptian. And the Star of David can be found in several ancient Egyptian monuments. In fact, if you go back even further in time, the so-called Star of Tutmos III was first used as the seal of Babylon by the Sumerians. Today, the symbol has been used by the Jews for a little over 100 years now, and this very same symbol is also worn on the hat of the Pope. And here are a few old Moroccan coins from the years 1286 and 1288. And as you can see, the Moors of Morocco used the Star of David symbol on their coins. So the Star of David is an ancient symbol used by the Sumerians thousands of years ago, and it was used 2,600 years ago by Tutmos III, your biblical King David, and it was still being used by the Moors of Morocco 700 years ago. So Black people were using this symbol for thousands of years before it was adopted by the Jews and the popes of Rome a little over 100 years ago. And the Star of David isn't the only thing to have been stolen from us. The so-called Jewish menorah is not Jewish at all. It's an ancient symbol used by the Nagas, or the Serpent Kings, and their artifacts are found all over the Americas, Egypt, and India. So the Jewish menorah is in fact not even Jewish. This is a common theme amongst white people, to take something that already existed and call it their own. Everything that exists today is not some new invention of the white mind. The only thing that the white man has accomplished is the ability to reverse engineer and replicate everything that Black people have already created thousands of years ago. Barcode was supposedly invented by Norman Woodland in the 50s, but what is known as barcode today was known in ancient times as square geometric Kufic. And there are ancient Mayan artifacts that show us that the Mayans used this language thousands of years before Norman Woodland ever existed. And according to white people, tobacco was cultivated for the first time in Virginia by a white man named John Rolfe. But how can that be true when the Mayans were cultivating tobacco in America 1,400 years before John Rolfe was even born? Sambo was a character in a book from 1899, and the definition of the word Sambo is a derogatory racial slur given to dark-skinned Indians. This black Mexican man in the picture is classified as a Sambo. And smoking Sambo is a black Indian from Mexico, also known as a Mayan or a Moor. And white people know very well what they've done. They still celebrate by mocking the black civilizations that they've destroyed. All of the evidence presented in this series collectively proves the ancient connection between the black civilizations of South America and Africa. The people known as the Mayans, the Aztec, the Inca, and the Olmec, and so forth of South America were connected to the Egyptian and Kushite races of Africa. And this is evident by the similarities in their culture, religious practices, their languages, the building of pyramids, and the similar style of art and symbolism that they used. And we can look at the H-block pyramids in the Sudan and Africa. They were built in 700 BC, so that's 2,700 years ago. And if you look at the H-block pyramids in South America, they're 4,000 years old, meaning the H-block pyramids in South America were built first. So there's also a 5,000-year-old pyramid in South America located in Brazil. And Brazil has thousands of pyramids that are more ancient than the pyramids in Mexico. So this made me think about Namor and the so-called flood of Noah. Because the real biblical story of Noah and the 8 people that survived the flood is really about Namor and the 8 gods on the boat of Ra that survived the flood. So I've shown you guys in another video the evidence of Namor with a procession of boats filled with all types of animals coming into Africa. And the 8 ancestors on the boat of Ra became the founders of the first dynasty of Egypt 5,000 years ago. And I've also shown you guys that there were 2 symbols beneath the boat of Ra, the sun cross and the bee symbol, 2 symbols that are native to America. So when we see that South America is filled with thousands of pyramids that are 5,000 years old, and the flood was recorded by the Egyptians 5,000 years ago, and it was also 5,000 years ago that the 8 ancestors came to Egypt with a procession of boats filled with animals, and they had to come from somewhere. And all of the evidence would suggest that Namor and the ancestors came from America. This could explain why Namor and the Mayans wore the same headdress in battle. So while most people contemplate what the pyramids were actually built for, their original purpose is actually right in front of our faces. Once again, white people claim that IBM built the first motherboard for a computer in 1981. Now we have to question where IBM got their motherboard design from, seeing how it's the same exact design as the large pyramid complexes of the world. So if we assume that the pyramids had the same function that a computer motherboard has, then this means that the pyramids were used as a connector to a grid, a power source. So most likely the pyramids were a source of power or energy, and all of the large pyramids around the world were connected to the same energy grid because that's what a motherboard does. It's a circuit board that allows all of the components to communicate with each other or to connect to the same grid and to receive power from whatever source of power they were using, which was undoubtedly the sun. Even Nikola Tesla's invention of the electric oscillator was not truly his invention, because this technology already existed in ancient times. And you'll notice the Djed pillar inside of the Ankh. The Djed pillar was also present in the Egyptian hieroglyphs, showing the Egyptians with light bulbs. The Djed pillar was used in conjunction with the pyramids to harvest energy from the sun, and the Mayans and the Egyptians both show themselves raising the Djed pillar.